This is the Healing Our Brokenness podcast, episode 100, where we dissect problems and solutions that exist among broken people living in a broken world. And we also go from broken relationships to resilience and flourishing. Have you ever been tired? And then not just tired, but more like exhausted and on every level? Did you know that emotional exhaustion can actually lead to burnout? And burnout isn't something that just comes up out of the blue. It's a slow process that's been happening over time. When we're not listening to our bodies and we're in fits of anxiety and constantly pushing ourselves past our limits. Okay. And when we catch it and we're being proactive about it and dealing with it, our symptoms help us to build resiliency, which is our ability to bounce back, to adapt, and to be able to keep moving every time we go through some type of trial or trauma, tribulation, etc., illness. Okay, being resilient gives us a collection of tools that we carry around in our toolbox we can use in case our problems resurface again. So it's not like if they resurface again, it's when. Again, we're not God. And the fact that we're not God, we cannot know every single time what's going to tip us over the edge. However, we can get to know ourselves better so that we can know our limitations and we can prevent the entire process from unraveling like a domino effect. And for a further explanation on limitations, you can go back a few episodes and listen to The Gift of Limitations. That would be a great resource. That one goes into more details about explaining our limitations, recognizing them, and also respecting them. It was about 4 years ago, I guess I would say maybe really about 5. When I think about it, it was from the period like from 2016 to 2018. And I had maybe 4 episodes of it, of dealing with emotional exhaustion. And these episodes, they end up occurring because a combination of compounded trauma, my own trauma, my kids' trauma, supporting them, financial devastation, and all the trials and everything that I was going through at the time. Majority of the trials were financial, but everything on every level, even extended family. I had all kind of stuff I was dealing with, all kind of stress. And what happened was there were several nights in a row where I had not slept well. And when I say not sleeping well, 2 to 3 hours of sleep per night, 4 days in a row. I knew by night number 3 that I had basically maxed out. I looked depressed. My face was swollen and puffy. And I just had a downward look to my face. It was just hard to describe. And when my daughter saw me, she said, "Are you okay, Mom?" And I said, "Yeah, why?" And she said, "Oh, you look like you lost your best friend." And so I looked in the mirror and I was like, "Oh, wow, I look like a mess, a hot mess." And then my son came in the door and he was walking upstairs and he said, "Man, you look jacked up." And I said, "Oh, thank you." And I laughed it off. But I was really not in a good state at all. Grief had gotten backed up. And so between the grief and the insomnia together, it was just a bad mix. It was straight from the pit of hell, literally. And so we all know that when we don't get enough sleep, it ripples down to other things, weight gain, hormonal issues. It can lead to mental health issues. Not getting enough sleep causes us to have trouble focusing. I mean, just can be just a number of things. It can go on and on and on. And then not getting enough sleep can cause us to be more emotional. And being more emotional and having grief backed up like we're, like plumbing being backed up can cause us not to have, get enough sleep. So it's kind of like, you know, like they say, what comes first, the chicken or the egg? they play back and forth, like back and forth rather. I said back and forth, kind of like a ping pong ball when it comes to being emotionally overwhelmed in our system and having insomnia. It's just not a good mix, okay? And so one thing about it, when I had this emotional exhaustion, it did not lead to burnout. It could have, by the grace of God, it did not, okay? Had I not been paying attention to my body and really listening to it, it could have been way worse than what it was, okay? I've heard ministers before mention that they have, some of them entered the stages of burnout and had to take time off for a year. And some of them were like pre-burnout, where they had gotten to the point of being very cynical about things. Cynicism had entered in their spirits on a whole nother level. And then you had it where they were also exhibiting emotional exhaustion and just kind of like the spirit of just not caring about anything and everything. And making statements that were not them when it came to God and his will for their lives and other people's lives. And so it took friends of theirs to notice the difference in their personality and to come to them, go to them and say, you know what, there's something going on, that type of thing. And letting them know that their characters were kind of out of sorts. And a lot of times that's what happens. It takes someone else coming over to us to check on us to see what it is that's going on, okay? And so they mentioned as well about just like not finding contentment or satisfaction in anything. So those are some of the red flags: emotional exhaustion, cynicism, not finding contentment or satisfaction in anything, and the inability to rest. Now, what I did when I had those about 4 episodes come on, I followed what the scripture says, what Elijah did, basically, believe it or not. As they say, desperate times lead to desperate measures, and that's basically what happened to me. Because of all the fear, despair, and everything that was going on in my soul, I just rested. I laid on the couch and I said, I'm just going to rest. I'm just not going to do anything. I'm going to literally rest in God. So I had worship music playing 24 hours. I had preaching playing. I had podcasts playing. I was reading Bible studies on, various subjects, reading my Bible. Anything uplifting is what I was trying to do, anything to feed my soul. And that literally is what helped to that, along with drinking 2-3 times more than the amount of tea the healthy tea that I normally drink, loading it up with ginger and lemon and honey, more than I would normally do, and garlic, and even bumping up a whole nother level with eating healthy. And I normally eat healthy, but with me feeling like that, it's like I was doubling up on everything, even when it came to the vitamins. And so I was able to get back up within about maybe 3 days of resting like that, 3 or 4 days, and I was back to myself. And with Elijah, he had just come from being out in battle, killing hundreds of false prophets, working all these miracles. And then he had not gotten any rest in there, had not got any food, had not gotten any rest. It was just going. So at the point when Jezebel threatened him, the fear and exhaustion of what had been going on, I like to call it the fear exhaustion cocktail. And there is an podcast episode out there if you want to go back and search for that episode on the fear and exhaustion cocktail. He had allowed that to come in, and that's a bad mix. So by the time he did stop after running from her, all of the emotional exhaustion came on and everything started to be processed. And he had basically ran himself out. He finally sat down and it was like, oh, but then at the same time, it was like realizing, oh, wow, what just happened? And then it's, oh, God, I'm ready to die, which was how I was feeling inside of my soul. Not I'm ready to die, but like, oh, I can't take this. And I'm like, what is going on? This is not me. But this is how Elijah was saying. So I could totally resonate. It was so like a Holy Spirit moment. And like I said, that's how I knew I was not myself. It's one thing to feel like that and be angry, bitter, and resentful. But it's another thing to feel like that and have a mixture of fear, sadness, depression, and just downright despair. It's just hard. It's hard to really describe. But I knew something was off. And Elijah had been running so that he hadn't even had time to think about whether something was off with him, with himself. God told him to eat, then eat and sleep, and eat again and rest and sleep again. He was going to need to be rested up for his journey. And sometimes that's what we need to do, just stop everything, you know? And so a lot of times we want a quick fix and we want to just go on about our business. And sometimes it is a quick fix. A lot of times it's not. And we have to give ourselves grace in this type of situations. The way the Holy Spirit works is really something else, because after I dealt with, maybe this was time number 2 or 3. It definitely wasn't number 1, but maybe about the second or third time that this had happened to me, it was just like, oh, I know what to do now. You know, I know what this is. I had ended up running into an individual and I saw their face, and their face looked exactly the way my face did when I was experiencing emotional exhaustion. And they started up, oh, this has happened again, blah, blah, blah. And I took one look at their face, could tell they were filled with despair. It was puffy, it was swollen. They were there. Their soul needed rest. And I said, you know what, how about you rest for 2 weeks and then we'll talk. And I had to set that boundary. I knew how I was in my condition, and it would not have been a good time for me to try to make any decisions in that condition. And I definitely wasn't about to play around with a conversation with someone else who was in the same manner I was. It wasn't going to get anywhere. And decisions that were made while I was in that state could end up just being way worse than what they normally would have been had I waited. It wasn't that serious. It was serious. I empathized, but having a conversation could wait, basically. So it's like, I'm sorry you're feeling this way. I hope you feel better. This is when we can talk. Okay. What happens is when we're dealing with emotional exhaustion and anxiety and all of that, and we don't give ourselves margin, we don't even have the capacity to tell that something's off, to know our limits, to question what's going on inside our souls. We just keep pushing and pushing and pushing. And the next thing you know, we're burned out. By the time we do say, maybe I need to start to rest, sometimes that's literally when the burnout sets in, because we've been so on autopilot, like the Energizer Bunny. Okay, and so sometimes we need to just have someone else to say, are you okay? With them noticing something's off. So sometimes that's what it takes. And us being able to be receptive to that, and setting up boundaries for us talking to them, and if it's us, for them setting up boundaries to have any type of logical discussion with us. Resiliency happens when we're resting, and this rest is happening on a daily basis, okay, as part of our rhythms. And if we're not giving ourselves margin, saying yes to everything that everybody asks us to do, then we're going to max out. And not saturating ourselves in God's word, we're going to max out. Computer networks only have a certain bandwidth, and so do we. We only have a certain emotional bandwidth. And in different seasons, different trials, different ages, different stages. That's basically what happens. Okay, so our abilities and goals and responsibilities can change off and on. They can change from one day to the next. We just never know what could be the tipping point. But we want to be able to bounce back with resiliency, and that way, each time the emotional exhaustion does hit, it will be less intense. Your brain and body will thank you and say, I know what to do, been there, done that. And after healing, if we get stuck, it's like, man, we don't want to get to the point rather of getting stuck. Man, I can't believe it happened. or the trauma of it. And it might be trauma that it happened because you're thinking, what if it happens again? Which is what I was thinking. But if we stay in it, then once again, that interrupts our ability to be able to bounce back and become resilient. Staying stuck harbors, it hinders our ability to bounce back and get back up. Okay, and it's kind of like, it makes me think about some mornings I wake up late for work, and it's like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I overslept. And I'm sitting in the bed for 20 minutes. Oh, I can't believe I overslept. And it's like, okay, Tina, finally I have to like get myself to snap out of it. Okay, you overslept. There's no point in you saying stuck in, I can't believe this happened. This happened. Now what? Then get up, get moving. Okay? Our souls will be happy. Our spirits will be happy. Our whole emotional and mental and physical and spiritual system will be happy that we got up and moved after getting the required rest that we need. And so God gave Elijah his next steps. It was like, okay, Elijah's like, okay, now what do I do? And God's like, point this person and point that person, point this person and point that person. So basically it's like, Elijah, you're not going to be doing all this by yourself anymore. And sometimes that's what he says to us. You need to appoint people to help you. You need to allow people to help you. You need to allow people to guide you. And a lot of times we get to that point because we're trying to do too much on our own to begin with. We're not God, but we think that we are a lot of times, in the way that we think that we have an infinite amount of energy. We're not being honest with ourselves, not being honest with our bodies. And like I said, when it comes to like emotional exhaustion and burnout, it's usually not because we don't have any type of symptoms. It slowly keep pushing in, and then we keep pushing the limit. And then when the stress comes out, we're surprised about it. But then we start thinking back, is this like, this was inevitable, so to speak. And so I'm preaching to myself. I promise you that I'm preaching to myself. Because at the end of the day, how we're taking care of ourselves, that ability to be resilient is also affects how we are in our relationships, whether we can flourish or whether our relationships are going to be in a constant state of languishing, okay? So whether it's at home, or church, work, in the ministry, whatever it is that we're doing, we want to be able to continue to flourish. We want to be able to continue to be resilient with our self-care, yielding and resting in God as part of resiliency. Those are things that are parts of the formula, and we cannot leave them out. So I hope I said something that resonated with you, and I want to thank you so much for listening to every single episode, okay? This is the 100 series. God has been so good, and I praise and I thank him for it, and I'm kind of in shock. You know I've been working hard to bring this material out to you, but the fact that it's the 100 episode, God is just so good. I want to give a shout out to Timothy Horton for bringing the intro and outro music every week. If you look up Timothy Horton, Valley of Grace, you can find it out here on YouTube. And I also want to thank you listeners for tuning in every week. And if you're really liking Heal Our Brokenness podcast, if it's something that's being said that's resonating with your soul, how about asking a friend to follow us now? How about asking a friend to do that? They're no longer saying subscribe, they're changing over to follow. So how about asking a friend to follow us, to support us on Spotify, iTunes, YouTube, Stitcher, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Amazon Music and Podcasts, okay? So if it's blessing you in any shape, form, or fashion, if you can do that as a favor and a blessing to me, until next time.